that we can come together. I pray that as we read your word, Lord, that you would help us to understand what we read, that your Holy Spirit would guide us in our conversation and in applying these things in our lives. And I just pray that we would have sensitive hearts and open minds to what you have for us here. And we just thank you in Jesus' name. Amen. Then Jesus spoke to the multitudes and to his disciples, saying, "The scribes and the Pharisees sit in Moses' seat. Therefore, whatever they tell you to observe, that observe and do, but do not do according to their works. For they say and do not do. For they bind heavy burdens, hard to bear, and lay them on men's shoulders, but they themselves will not move them with one of their fingers. But all their works they do to be seen by men. They make their phylacteries broad and enlarge the borders of their garments. They love the best places at feasts and best seats in the synagogues, greetings in the marketplaces, and to be called by men, Rabbi, Rabbi. But you do not be called Rabbi, for one is your teacher, the Christ, and you are all brethren. Do not call anyone on earth your father, for one is your Father who is in heaven. And do not be called teachers, for one is your teacher, the Christ. But he who is greatest among you shall be your servant, and whoever exalts himself will be humbled, and he who humbles himself will be exalted. But woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for you shut up the kingdom of heaven against men. For you neither go in yourselves, nor do you allow those who are entering to go in. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for you devour widows' houses, and for a pretense make long prayers. Therefore you will receive greater condemnation. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for you travel land and sea to win one proselyte, and when he is won, you make him twice as much a son of hell as yourselves. Woe to you, blind guides, who say, whoever swears by the temple, it is nothing, but whoever swears by the gold of the temple is obliged to perform it. Fools and blind, for which is greater, the gold or the temple that sanctifies the gold? And whoever swears by the altar, it is nothing, but whoever swears by the gift that is on it is obliged to perform it. Fools and blind, for which is greater, the gift or the altar that sanctifies the gift? Therefore, he who swears by the altar swears by it and all that is on it. He who swears by the temple swears by it and by him who dwells in it. And he who swears by heaven swears by the throne of God and by him who sits on it. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites! For you pay tithe of mint and anise and cumin, and have neglected the weightier matters of law, justice, mercy, and faith. These you ought to have done without leaving the others undone. Blind guides who strain out a gnat and swallow a camel. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for you cleanse the outside of the cup and dish, but inside they are full of extortion and self-indulgence. Blind Pharisees, first cleanse the inside of the cup and dish, then the outside of them may be clean also. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for you are like whitewashed tombs, which indeed appear beautiful outwardly, but inside are full of dead men's bones and are uncleanness. Even as you also outwardly appear righteous to men, but inside you are full of hypocrisy and lawlessness. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, because you build the tombs of the prophets and adorn the monuments of the righteous, and say, if we had lived in the days of our fathers, we would not have partaken with them in the blood of the prophets. Therefore you are witnesses against yourselves that you are sons of those who murdered the prophets. Fill up then the measure of your father's guilt. Serpents, brood of vipers, how can you escape the condemnation of hell? Therefore, indeed, I send you prophets, wise men, and scribes. Some of them you will kill and crucify. Some of them you will scourge in the synagogues and persecute from city to city, that on you may come all the righteous blood shed on the earth, from the blood of the righteous Abel to the blood of Zechariah, son of Berechiah, whom you murdered between the temple and the altar. Assuredly, I say to you that all these things will come upon this generation. O Jerusalem, Jerusalem, the one who kills the prophets and stones those who are sent to her, how often I wanted to gather your children together as a hen gathers her chicks under her wings. But you were not willing. See, your house is left to you desolate. For I say to you, you shall see me no more till you say, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. Well, we see here that Jesus is not easy on some people, is he? He didn't hold anything back. Do you think Jesus was trying, and looking at this chapter as a whole, do you think Jesus was trying to make these people feel good about themselves? Was his goal to make them build up their self-esteem?
No.
It's not what they needed. It's not what they needed at all, was it?
They needed a reality check.
Yeah. Did he fall for the show that people put on to appear righteous and godly on the outside? Does Jesus get deceived by that kind of thing? Of course not. He sees the heart, doesn't he? But interestingly enough, he starts it out by saying what in verse 2? Yeah, they sit in Moses' seat, so what are we to do about that? Yeah, it says, you should observe and do, but do not according to their works. Whatever they tell you to observe and do, so obey them. He was telling them to obey the law because they sit in a position of authority. I thought that was an interesting way to start this chapter, where he is so hard on all their actions. He says, but at the very beginning, he says, you still need to obey what they say. That's difficult, isn't it? Because when you see hypocrisy, you want to, we want to just rebel against that. But let's read 1 Peter 2, 13 through 17.
Be subject for the Lord's sake to every human institution, whether it be emperor or to the emperor as supreme, or the governors that sent by him. Punish those who do evil, and praise those who do good. For this is the will of God, that by doing good you should put to silence the ignorance of foolish people. Live as people who are free, not using your freedom as a cover-up for evil, but living as servants of God. Honor everyone, love them brotherhood, fear God, honor the king.
Okay, so we're given specific instructions by Jesus and by the apostles that we're to respect authority, and even though the Lord is the ultimate authority, he tells his disciples to respect the authority even of these hypocrites. That's hard to take, isn't it? Because that's kind of un-American. We're rebellious people, aren't we? Kind of at nature, we don't typically want to be respectful toward that, and I always struggle with that too. But it's something that I think it's worth reminding ourselves of here, because Jesus says that right at the beginning. Okay, so now we're to verse 4. What does Jesus say that the scribes and Pharisees did? Verse 4. Okay, so what did they do? They put heavy burdens on people. What does that mean? Heavy burdens on people. Okay, they had a lot of laws for people to follow. Above and beyond what God had written. They you know,
But I find a lot of writings in the Bible are sort of like that, because it's man's talk and man's way that they're trying to explain people, like having many wives for one man and all that, but then they, and they're the slaves and stuff. But that's not.
well, you might be confusing, because the Bible tells us what happens, and it also gives us commands what to do. What happened and happens, yeah. It isn't, by telling you something that happened in the Bible, isn't God saying you need to follow this example. And that's pretty clear if you read the context of what's going on there. God wasn't telling Jacob to have 2 wives, or Solomon. He actually warned them against that. And so but that's what happened. What?
States in the Bible several places that there's only one man, one woman shall be united in one.
Right, yes.
One flesh.
Exactly, right. But what were the Pharisees doing? See, there is the Word, the God's word, right? There is the law. And then there is our lives, right? And when we take the Bible, God's word or the law, and then we have to apply that in our lives, right? And the Pharisees and scribes are kind of like in the position of the pastor or the teachers or whatever, and they make application to our daily lives, right? Now, how were they making that application? They were making that application in a way that bound up heavy burdens on people, and they didn't help them with that. So what they did do was put a heavy burden on people, and what they didn't do was what? Burden themselves with anything. So it was a self-serving work that the Pharisees were involved in. Is that important for us to remember when we're dealing especially with maybe children and new believers? To not overwhelm them? Yeah, we need to be sensitive to how much can this person handle, right? How much is this person able to understand, for one thing, and how much are they actually capable of? Take a small child is probably an easier example to see, and you ask them to do something that they're not capable of doing, and then punish them for that, for not doing it. That's not even fair, right? We can see that. Some people, sometimes we can, but I think I've probably been guilty of that more than once. Maybe you have too. And hopefully we see our mistake and correct that. But we can also do that with new believers, can't we? We can put a burden on people that they're not ready for yet. And we need to be sensitive to that as a Christian, that maybe you've been a Christian for a lot of years, and there's something this is important, but someone else isn't quite ready for that yet, and we need to be sensitive to that. Obviously, these Pharisees had no concern for the other person. They were pretty much just concerned about how they could promote themselves and their power. It can be, yeah. Let's read 1 Corinthians 9:19 through 23. Kind of addresses this subject a little bit.
For though I am free from all, I have made myself a servant to all, that I might win more of them. For the Jews I became king as a Jew, in order to win the Jews. Those under the law I became as one under the law, though not being myself under the law, that I might win those under the law. For those outside the law I became as one outside the law, not being outside the law of God, but under the law of Christ, that I might win those outside the law. To the weak I became weak, that I might win the weak. I have become all things to all people, that by all means I might save some. I do it all for the sake of the gospel, that I may share with them in its blessings.
Okay, so if you ever had a small child and you're trying to explain something to them, it's helpful, you probably all have done this before, is you get down there like this, right with them. You get down there really close to them, and you show them, and you explain it to them, and you kind of go along at their level, and then they get it, right? When you're standing up real tall and, you're pointing your finger, it doesn't work so good, because you're not relating to them, right? And that's what the Apostle Paul is explaining. Sometimes we need to just get down to their level a little bit and walk with them a little bit and show them the right way, a new believer. And the Pharisees were looking down their long nose and their long fingers and just pointing and saying, you do this and this and this, and we're not willing to lift a finger to help them along the way. Do you get that? Does that make sense? Am I missing something here? There's more, but in this part, I think that we can make that relationship with new believers or with people that need extra help there, and make sure that we're not, condescending toward others. Sure. That's very good, Tina, that Jesus wasn't a hypocrite, was he? And I'm going to get to that. I'm going to get just right to that point in a few minutes, because that's really so important in this chapter. In verses 5 through 7, what does it say motivated? Jesus talks about the motivation, the Pharisees. What was the motivation for them? What made them move? Motivation means like what gets you going, what excites you, what motivates, what?
Notice of men.
Right, yeah, fame, notice of men. It says all their works they do to be seen by men. That's what their motivation was. What's wrong with that?
It's prideful.
Yeah.
Arrogance.
It puts a focus on me, right? Self. Who should get the focus and the attention?
God.
Yeah, he's the one who's worthy of that, right? And that wasn't their motivation in that. What does this world think about that type of thing? Is there any problem? Do they have a problem with that? The world's philosophies and... Right, yeah. Glory for self is pretty much...
Do what makes you happy.
Yeah, do what makes you happy. Yeah, there's that, for sure. But there's also that getting glory for yourself. You know, tooting your own horn, whatever you want to call it. You look at some of the Hollywood type stuff, that goes on, and the self-promotion that goes on, and the awards they give people, and all that, how they worship these superstars or whatever, sports, and the attention that gets, and how many millions of people are watching and participating in professional sports. It's a religion. I mean, they're worshiping these people, really. Yeah. You don't think so? Would you think you could? I don't know. Who is telling me that? There's this. No, I don't want to get sidetracked there. But it's. I'm just applying this to what we see in our world. It takes a lot more of people's time and attention and effort promoting these superstar people than they do to God. Even Christians are spending more time on sports and entertainment than they do in fellowship and worship. What does that say about our priorities? Yeah, it shows that this self-promotion thing is something that, we are glorifying man, and that's not right. We need to turn that around. Give God the glory He deserves, and these other things, it is hypocrisy. Those people don't deserve that. Those people don't deserve those superstars, actors, or sports people, or whatever. They don't deserve that kind of praise. They don't deserve that kind of glory or that kind of attention. Only God does, and we shouldn't give it to them. We shouldn't try and take it for ourselves either, but we shouldn't give them that kind of attention. They're not worthy of that. Where does that attitude come from? Where does that attitude of seeking glory come from? It comes from Satan. And sometimes the people doing it don't look like they have horns on their head and dress around in a red suit, but it's satanic. Let's read Isaiah 14, 12 through 15. Okay, that's a prophecy about Lucifer, about what he's doing and about what will happen. He has been trying to exalt himself above God for ages. And when we do that, we're following him, right? That we're doing the same thing that Satan did, that got him cast out of heaven and will eventually get him cast into hell. Let's read also Matthew 4, verse 8 and 9. What does Satan want? He wants worship, right? He wants people to treat him like God. And what are people doing that want that kind of praise, that want that kind of drawing attention to ourselves, right? Always trying to look for that prideful, that wrong attitude. These Pharisees were doing it. We see it in our day. I think if we're honest, we can see it in every one of our own hearts. There's that old man that wants to come up and get the attention and get have our pride lifted up and our ego puffed up, all these things. And that's the attitude that Jesus is speaking against here. They love the best place at feast, the best seats in the synagogue, greetings in the marketplace, to be called a rabbi. They enlarge the borders of their garments, the phylacteries. That doesn't make sense to us, probably. That would make sense to them. I don't know. I know what that means in their day. What does it mean in our day? It could mean dressing in a way that draws attention to yourself unrightly, you know? People don't like to have anyone tell them how to dress because that's a very personal thing, but exactly, yeah. You can do it in a lot of different ways, but when it draws attention to yourself, it's pride. And they did it in a way that, yeah, it is in the law, but they made it, blew it up even bigger because they wanted to puff up themselves. I don't see that as something people are doing now, literally, but we still can do that to try and puff up ourselves. Something to think about. Verses 8 through 12. He talks about addressing people with certain, you might even say respectful ways. Do you think he's literally saying don't call anyone on earth your father? Is that his point here? What is it? Okay. Okay. Are there labels that we put on people or we take that, we could say labels or credentials or something that kind of tend to puff people up? Yeah. It's kind of an accepted thing in our world, isn't it? I mean, I don't want to rock any boats, but, you know, I'm doctor this, and I'm PhD that, and I'm reverend this, and I'm, you know, I wrote 10 best-selling books, and I'm going to introduce the next speaker, and he's wrote this many books, and he has a doctorate from this university. What is that? It is. We kind of accept it, though, don't we? You think that might be what Jesus is talking about? I don't know. I'm just thinking about, you know, what we do in our day and age. Maybe there's some things that we need to consider too. There's positions in this world. The Bible teaches that we have positions even in the church. There's different roles that people have, different what do you call that? You know, positions of authority and things like that. But what does Jesus say is the greatest position to have? A servant. Yeah. See, he turns it all upside down. And this puffing up people's egos with labels is worldly. It's worldly. It's the way the world does stuff. I don't think it's the way we should be doing things. Yeah, it can be. It isn't always, but it can be. You're right. Are there even good things that we have in our history or in our past accomplishments and things that can puff us up? You know, it's a blessing to have a godly family, godly heritage, a good church. It's a blessing to have good friends. But can we become proud too, even in those things? We need to be aware of that, I think, because I think that can become a point of even boasting in a Christian's life that we need to be aware of. Look at verse 12. It says, "And whoever exalts himself will be humbled, and he who humbles himself will be exalted." You know, there's a lot of this stuff is really subtle stuff. So it's hard to put your finger on because it's stuff that's going on in our hearts, right? And we can see it come out in outward ways, but we need to look at our own hearts honestly. And I hope that I hope that I'm doing that too. I don't want to be one to be guilty of exactly what Jesus says here by pointing fingers. Every one of us has this in our heart to some degree. We can be proud of our family. We can be proud of our church. We can be proud in these things, and it goes beyond just that blessing, like thanking God. It goes to personal pride, and that's something that is really being warned against in this chapter. It's that personal pride. They took pride in their heritage, like big-time pride in their heritage. And Jesus said, out of these stones I can raise up children from Abraham. So God doesn't need you. And, we may have a good family, or we may not, but we need to be aware that God doesn't need our heritage. It's a blessing, but we should thank him for it and not become proud in that. We're not worthy of any of that anyway. What does verse 13 mean? It says, "But woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for you shut up the kingdom of heaven against men, for you neither go in yourselves, nor do you allow those who are entering to go in." What does that mean? Okay, blocking it.
Jesus
How do
is
you-
preventing, not Jesus, the Pharisees are preventing the people from knowing about God because they claim it to be holy and out of their reach, yet they don't enter themselves because they don't act accordingly.
They're leading people astray, huh?
Yeah.
They're leading people astray. And
Growing up Catholic, I learned that helps a lot into the Catholic way of living, because, I had a Bible, but it was up on the table like that, and we weren't allowed to touch it. It was too holy.
yeah, that I can see. That is like similar. Yeah.
God didn't have a problem with what they were actually doing. He had a problem with why they were doing it. Like he told them to put, their garments like that, he told them to put the blackberries on, combining with the word on. But it was that action, he didn't have a problem with it, problem with the heart of why they were doing it. When they do the same how he just says, be my king, most honest person there, but in pride, be the most honest person. And it's with all of that, because in doing this, they were teaching, do these things, and only these things make God happy, because God wanted them to come out with all their heart and do these things because he wants them to do it. But it was they just were putting it on you, this alone, and removing the whole, almost God out of the equation.
Mm-hmm.
But the vessels were actually a vessel against them, how they were. Somebody that don't remember the exact, what it represented.
Yeah, and I think that Jesus probably wore those tassels himself. It was not something that he was saying. I mean, even the father and the teacher and those words weren't the problem. It was that people exalting themselves and being prideful in their positions and taking pride in that. It really comes down to pride, and that's what they're showing by what they do, and that's what keeping others out of the kingdom too. So it wasn't only hurting them; it was hurting people around them. It says, "For you shut up the kingdom against men," and that's even worse than what they were already on the wrong track, but they were leading others down the wrong way too. In verse 14, did God hear their prayers? Yeah, it says their prayers were a pretense. So who are they praying to if it's a pretense? Let's read Luke 18, 9 through 14. This gives a parable which kind of puts this passage into a clear light. Luke 18, 9 through 14. Okay, that's just a short parable, and the Pharisee stood and prayed thus with himself. I think it says a lot right there. His prayers, and Jesus said they're a pretense. His prayers were just congratulating himself about how good he was. And it says that God, I tell you, this man went down to his house justified, the tax collector, rather than the other. So God was not impressed with these Pharisees' prayers and their show of righteousness that was only a show. Verse 23 through 26. What did the Pharisees make a big deal of? Tithing? Money? Things they did. What did they make? What did they ignore? So could you say they made a big deal out of small things and a small deal out of big things? That's exactly what they did, right? Jesus says the weightier matters of justice, mercy, and faith, these you ought to have done the small things without leaving out the big. I'll just read it. These things you ought to have done without leaving the others undone. So they were focusing on things that were much less important in order to, small things. Then and they were ignoring the justice, the mercy, and the faith, things that God is very important. Heart matters. Why were they doing that? Because they're human, okay. That's true. but more than that, why are they doing that? What motivated them?
Themselves.
Yeah, it fit into that thing of puffing up themselves, right? Because they could say, look at all the little details that I take care of. It was outward things that helped them with the goal of looking good to people. Okay, how many times, I didn't even count, but you can probably count if you want, if the little things are important to you. How many times does he say hypocrite?
7.
A lot of times. I mean, when you're, it might be, I don't know. It's used over and over in this chapter, hypocrite. What does hypocrite mean?
Someone who does one thing but does the opposite thing, or does another thing. Not a hypocrite. Oh, I won't
G-
do that.
Okay, in verse 4 it said, "For they bind heavy burdens hard to bear and lay them on men's shoulders, but they themselves will not move them with one of their little fingers. Their works they do to be seen by men. They make," okay, so we see that that's true. They did do that. They didn't do what they said. They didn't help with what they were saying they do. But there's more to this word than just that. What does it literally mean? I mean, it actually, the Greek and the English word are almost the same, and it has a meaning in itself. It is. It was the word that they would use. It's a person who is on a stage acting. He's literally saying, "You actors, you actors, you actors, you actors." That's what he's saying. That's the word he's using. And what does an actor do? You would literally be using the right word. But what does an actor do? They pretend to be something they're not, right? They're pretending to be something not. So Jesus is saying over and over again, you're pretending to be something that you're not. That's what that word means. And I think that's an important thing to grasp, because that is the definition, and it isn't a bad definition, I think, when you say say one thing and do another. But it's slightly different than pretending to be something that you're not. And that's important. Was Jesus ever a hypocrite? Was he ever acting? Jesus was who he was, right? I mean, all the time, Jesus was who he was. Did he ever work a miracle to show off or promote himself? It was always for a purpose. Jesus always had a purpose in his miracles. If he wanted to show off, it would be so easy for him to do that. Could you imagine how much money Jesus could have made just with the sick people he healed? I mean, that's one of the biggest industries in the world, is medicine, right? Because we all have sicknesses, we all have diseases, and we all have injuries that need to be healed. And Jesus could just do that. He could have ruled the world just with that one thing.
What I really liked about that with Jesus is that he could have done a lot of stuff when the serpent, when the enemy do all this. If you're Jesus, you can do this, turn the rock, you can do this, and all this stuff. He didn't, because he's not there to prove himself to anybody.
Yeah. So often he would say to people, not always, but so often he would say to people, "Don't tell anybody about this." And what kind of a promotion is that of yourself? Well, it's not, because he wasn't trying to promote himself. He came as a servant. You could take his being able to multiply food or calming storms. Any one of those things could have made him a very popular, very, had been a very in a very high position. But Jesus said over and over again that he did over and over again, he would just go away to a solitary place and pray. He would go, he would heal people, he would multiply the food, even calm the storm, and then he would just go off solitary place and he would spend time with the Lord. He wasn't there to promote himself, even though he deserved that. What do you think about Christians today? Christianity today? All the self-promotion. Do you see that?
It's prevalent. I mean, far too common for that to be the face of Christianity.
Yeah. There's a lot of glitz and glamour, acting, lights, shows going on. Is that what Jesus taught us? What did Jesus do? Yeah, he suffered and he died. And you know what? He said that's how the gospel is going to be spread too, isn't it? People who are willing to suffer for him, people who are willing to sacrifice themselves. It's not about promoting ourselves, it's about self-sacrifice. And, you know, I don't want to just look out there because every one of us has it in our own hearts, but it's out there. And so much of what is called Christianity today is actually promoting self. Jesus humbled himself. Let's read Philippians 2, 5 through 11. Okay, so we see Jesus was the real thing, wasn't he? He came and he suffered and he died. He humbled himself and became obedient to the point of death. And what does the Lord say? He says, humble yourselves in the sight of the Lord. And what does the rest of that verse say? No, that isn't that verse. It's another verse. Does anybody know? Humble yourself in the sight of the Lord and he will lift you up, right? When we humble ourselves in the sight of the Lord, Christ is that example. He lifts us up. He promotes us. And then it's okay. He's the one that does that. But glory always goes to the Lord for that. Okay, what is, the first question is, who sits in Moses' seat today? You read, the Israeli government sits in Moses' seat. Let's read Deuteronomy 33, verse 4. Okay, Moses commanded the law for us in a heritage. And let's read Ezra 7, verse 6. Okay, so you could say that the one in Moses' seat is the one that interprets and applies the law of God for the people. That's what Moses did. He interpreted and applied the law of God to the people. Do we have people who do that for us today? Yeah. Let's read 1 Timothy 3, 1 through 7. Okay, so we see there a qualification for an overseer or a bishop. It's a leader in the church, and the qualifications are humility, I would say, is a good sum of that, humility and ability to take care of the little things in your life. It's not a charismatic speaker. It's not a person who has a boisterous personality. It's to be someone who can take care of their own things and therefore be able to be an example to the church. And then 1 Timothy 5, verse 17.
The elders who are good leaders are to be considered worthy of double honor, especially those who are hard at preaching and teaching.
Okay, so there's to be, people are to labor in the Word, to spend time studying and teaching the Word. And then 2 Timothy 4, 1 through 5. I'm in Timothy a lot because those are the pastoral epistles. These are instructions to pastoral or leadership in the church. 2 Timothy 4, 1 through 5. Did someone have 2 Timothy 4, 1 through 5? Oh, well, go ahead.
It might be that one.
Oh, there is? Oh, okay. No, it is, isn't it? Why don't you read it, Caleb?
I charge you therefore before God and the Lord Jesus Christ, who shall judge the quick and the dead at his appearing in his kingdom. Preach the word, be instant in season, out of season, reprove, rebuke, exhort with all longsuffering and doctrine. For the time will come when they will not endure sound doctrine, but after their own lusts they shall heap for themselves teachers, having itching ears. And they shall turn away their ears from the truth, and shall be turned unto fables. But watch thou in all things, endure afflictions, do the work of an evangelist, make full proof of thy ministry.
Okay, this is a call to the leadership in the church to preach the word, to have sound doctrine, to evangelize the world. So we see that it is, in the church, the seat of Moses. Okay, question 2, what impact does another's hypocrisy have on your responsibility to obedience? What? Okay, yeah. Do you think Jesus would buy into the commonly spoken excuse, I'm not going to church because it's full of hypocrites? Have you ever heard that? Would Jesus agree with that statement? No, he said, these people are hypocrites. Do what they say. Can you believe that? Jesus said that. That was what verse 2 said. They're in Moses' seat. So that's obviously not an excuse. I don't like hypocrisy. Nobody really likes hypocrisy, but it's not an excuse to stay away. Okay, what is better than having a title of respect? What is better than that? Okay, having God's love, that's much better, isn't it? How important is a title to you? How important is that someone address you with a title of respect? If you've worked hard for your PhD, do you want everybody calling you doctor? I mean, who cares, right? Yeah. That's a worldly idea. It's a worldly construction of ways to puff people up. I don't know. We listen to people who have certain titles in their name or something like that more than others, and we really should be looking at how well this person is a servant, right? How well this person serves the Lord and others. What gives man or woman value and worth? Is it their title? The letters behind their name? Okay, the quality of their character. Ultimately, let's just read Genesis 1, 26 through 28. This is kind of the foundation of our worth.
Then God said, let us make man in our image, according to our likeness. Let them have dominion over the fish, over the sea, over the birds of the air, over the cattle, over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth. Now God created man after his own image, in the image of God he created him. Male and female he created them. Then God blessed them together, and God said to them, be fruitful and multiply. Fill the earth and subdue it, have dominion over the fish of the sea, over the birds of the air, over every living thing that moves on the earth.
What makes a man or woman, a child, a boy or girl have value? We're made in the image of God. Yeah. It has nothing to do with our title, our position, our education, our ability to accomplish things. It is because we're made in the image of God. And we need to remember that as a foundation, because every person that's born or unborn has value because they're made in the image of God. Every person. Old, young, helpless, Everyone has value to God. We're made in his image, and we should remember that. That's something that's very quickly being lost in our culture. Is putting yourself down the result of humility? That's question 4. What is putting yourself down? What is that about? Yeah, a lot of times it's actually drawing attention to ourselves, isn't it? It's not really, that's called false humility, probably. Yeah, it's kind of a backwards way of getting attention. Yeah, and it too is hypocrisy. Let's read Romans 12, verse 3. Romans 12, verse 16, and Romans 12, verse 10. I think I handed those out in 3 different ones. Probably should have put them in one. So Romans 12, 3. So do not think of yourself more highly than you ought. That's a good thing to remember. We ought to all remember that one. Every one of us, I'm sure, needs, do not think of yourself more highly than you ought. Romans 12, 16. Uh-oh. Is that one out there? Romans 12, 16.
But harmony with one another, do not be proud. Instead, associate with the humble. Do not be wise in your own estimation.
Okay, being wise in our own estimation, our own opinions, being opinionated about things, being condescending about how we present things. We need to be careful that we're not, that all draws attention to self, right? Puffing up ourselves. And that's something that we need to be aware of. You can say the right thing, say the right words, but you're coming across as being, proud, arrogant, all that. So we got to be aware of that too. Romans 12, verse 10.
Be kindly affectionate one to another with brotherly love, in honor preferring one another.
Okay, so giving honor and preference to one another. A lot to work on there. It's an important attitude that needs to be cultivated in everyone's heart because it doesn't come naturally. That kind of stuff doesn't come naturally. It comes naturally only when the Holy Spirit is at work in us, and then he brings that about in us. Okay, what is the antidote for hypocrisy? Okay, doing what you say you're going to do? Okay. If hypocrisy is acting, what's the opposite?
The opposite of acting.
Yeah. Okay, being real. What? Following?
The opposite of acting. Following the Lord.
Okay.
The opposite of acting.
Yeah, I think we got to also look. That's a good point. Following what the example that Jesus gives. Yeah. So because is the reason for hypocrisy, and that is that we want glory and praise. The reason for hypocrisy, the reason for putting on a show or acting, is that we want glory and praise. So the antidote for acting or hypocrisy, you might think would be being genuine, and that's part of it, but it's also being genuinely humble, right? Being genuinely humble. Because if acting is promoting self, then being genuine could also promote self, but being genuinely humble is promoting God. It's exalting God. Deep down in our hearts, that's what has to happen, right? Deep down in our hearts, to stop thinking so highly of ourselves and so much of self, and replace that with praise to God. So this was a long chapter about hypocrisy and about the dangers of that, and the dangers of pride. Really, is where it comes down to, pride and selfishness. And I just wanted to close with where you were going at the beginning, and that is that God is no hypocrite. God is no actor. God's the real thing. And though he has no reason to be humble, he has no reason that he needs to be humble, he did it anyway. Think about that. Meditate on that thought. God humbled himself. He came down to us, lived among us, these humble people, to be an example to us. He went so far as to suffer and die on the cross and be humiliated. There's no reason he had to do that, but he chose to because he's so good. God is so good, and he deserves all the glory, and we need to just exalt him in what we do. And that thought itself is enough to take away and sum up this whole thing. God is no actor. God is no hypocrite. He's the real thing, and he humbled himself. Let's see, who wants to close in prayer? Can you close in prayer for us?